A quiet village, a chilling murder, and two of the greatest detectives in history. Who killed Colonel Protheroe? As the camera slowly zooms in on Vicarage Lane, an eerie, almost suffocating fog swirls through the narrow, forgotten street of St. Mary Mead. The town, draped in shadows, lies under a heavy silence, broken only by the distant creak of old wooden shutters and the occasional howl of a wind, like a ghost in the night. The dying rays of the sun slip below the horizon, casting long, twisted shadows over the cobblestone streets. The picturesque homes, neatly tucked behind stone fences, appear serene from the outside, but there is something unsettling in the air. A town so perfect in its stillness is hiding something far darker, far more sinister. A secret that could shatter the facade of peace the town has clung to for so long. The incident. Then, the silence is shattered one sharp, deafening gunshot. The sound echoes through the empty night, reverberating through the cold walls of a grand, decaying manor. The camera sweeps across the house, zooming in on the study where a chilling sight awaits. Colonel Protheroe, once a man of power and authority, lies sprawled across his desk, his body twisted in an unnatural angle. His head, a mangled mess, bears the mark of a single bullet, blood pooling like dark ink across the antique carpet, staining the once pristine fibers. His eyes, wide open in shock and terror, fixate on the blood-soaked photograph he grips in his stiffening fingers. The photograph, though faded and torn, is unmistakably clear, a woman, her face hauntingly familiar, staring back at him with a look of sorrow, or perhaps revenge. The murder weapon a gleaming, silver pistoles on the floor next to him, its barrel glinting ominously in the dim light. On the handle, a family crest stands out, a chilling clue in the midst of chaos. The mystery. Colonel Protheroe, feared and loathed by many, especially for his ruthless ways, was no stranger to enemies. His reputation preceded him: selfish, tyrannical, and deeply unforgiving. Yet no one could have foreseen this violent end. The townsfolk, though eager to see his downfall, never imagined it would come so suddenly, so brutally. And now, in the wake of his death, things begin to spiral out of control. Within moments of the discovery, 3 different suspects come forward, each one confessing to the murder with cold, eerie calmness. But as each confession unravels, the truth becomes even murkier. Was it Ben Whittaker, the embittered ex-soldier with a dark temper, who could not forgive the colonel's public humiliation of him? Or was it Arthur, the vicar's assistant, whose nervous tone and icy demeanor seemed to betray his own guilt? Or was it Lucy, the housekeeper, whose quiet grief might conceal a deeper, more twisted secret? With every confession, the investigation becomes a maze, and the police, overwhelmed, desperate, can hardly make sense of it all. But as the tension rises, one thing is clear. The colonel's death is not just a murder. It's a carefully orchestrated game, and someone is playing it far too well. Miss Marple's entrance. And then, amidst this storm of confusion and chaos, she enters. Miss Jane Marple, an elderly woman, often overlooked, whose quiet presence has always seemed like nothing more than a passing thought to those around her. She steps into the room, her soft footsteps almost lost beneath the cacophony of frantic voices and accusations. She says nothing, does nothing to draw attention to herself. Her posture is relaxed, her eyes seemingly gentle, yet there is something in her gaze, a sharpness, a quiet observance that speaks volumes. She watches from the corner, unnoticed by the investigators, yet her mind is already at work, piecing together the fractured puzzle in front of her. The chaos unfolds around her, yet she remains calm, composed, as though she has already seen the threads of the mystery unravel before anyone else. Her silence is unnerving, and yet it's in this silence that her presence speaks the loudest. She knows something, something that the others have missed, something that will change everything. But for now, she says nothing, her eyes darting, her mind ticking, as she waits for the right moment to make her move. The room is filled with tension, but there is a subtle, almost unnoticeable air of anticipation around Miss Marple, as though she holds the key to unlocking the whole twisted affair. She might not have spoken a word, but her silence screams louder than any confession could. Cliffhanger ending. As the camera pulls back, a gust of wind rattles the window panes, and the tension in the room escalates. The suspects, still rattling off their confessions, suddenly seem more nervous, their voices quivering under the weight of Miss Marple's watchful eyes. The police, caught between the conflicting stories, glance towards her, unsure of how to proceed. And in that moment, Miss Marple finally speaks, her voice quiet but firm. "This," she says, her words slicing through the air like a knife, "isn't just a murder. It's a message." She pauses, her gaze shifting from one suspect to the next. And the real murderer, or shiz, still in this room. The room falls deathly silent. Everyone is caught in her gaze, their hearts racing, their minds whirling. Miss Marple's cryptic words linger in the air, and the audience is left reeling, caught between disbelief and dread. What is she hinting at? Who is she protecting? And why does it feel like the case is far from over? With the camera lingering on her calm, unreadable face, the scene cuts to black, a final, haunting question echoing in the void. What happens next? Investigation begins. The scene shifts to the dimly lit police station, where Inspector Graves is pacing back and forth, his brow furrowed in frustration. The murder of Colonel Protheroe has thrown the small town of St. Mary Mead into chaos, and he is no closer to the truth than he was when the gunshot rang through the night. Every piece of evidence leads to more questions than answers, and he can feel the weight of the case pressing down on him. The confessions keep pouring in, one after another, each more bizarre than the last. The room feels stifling, as if the walls themselves are closing in on him. "Who do I trust?" Graves mutters under his breath, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. His eyes flicker to the stack of papers in front of him, each one detailing a suspect with their own version of events. There's no pattern, no clear thread connecting the confessions, just a growing sense of confusion and dread. How could three people confess to the same murder, and all sound so believable? First, suspect Ben Whittaker. The door creaks open, and in walks Ben Whittaker, the first suspect to come forward. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a hardened face, Ben's military background is evident in his rigid posture. His eyes, however, betray a certain unease, flickering nervously as he takes a seat across from the inspector. He's been waiting in the interrogation room for over an hour, but his anxiety doesn't seem to lessen. "I did it," Ben says, his voice gravelly and low. There's no hesitation, no quiver in his tone, as if confessing were the easiest thing in the world. Graves leans forward, his instincts on high alert. He's heard confessions before, but this one feels wrong. Ben's words hang in the air, too perfect, too rehearsed. "Go on." Graves urges, his voice cold but calculating. "Tell me why." Ben's hands clench into fists, his knuckles turning white. "Colonel Protheroe humiliated me, in front of the whole town. He called me a coward, made me the butt of his jokes, and I couldn't take it anymore." His jaw tightens as he recalls the memory, the bitterness in his voice rising with each word. "I snapped. He deserved it. No one makes me look weak, not even him." The confession seems simple enough, but something about Ben's delivery doesn't sit right with Graves. His eyes flicker to the gun-own with the colonel's family crest laid out on the table. It's too clean, too perfect. It feels like a setup. But then again, why would Ben confess so quickly if he were guilty? Why wouldn't he try to deny it, cover his tracks? Graves finds himself tangled in contradictions. Ben's story paints him as a man driven by rage, pushed to the edge by years of ridicule. The motive seems clear, vengeance for a man who humiliated him. But the details, they don't add up. Where was Ben when the shot was fired? How could he have known exactly where the colonel would be, sitting in his study, waiting to die? And then there's the photograph, the blood-soaked photograph that Colonel Protheroe was clutching in his hand when he was found dead. Ben's confession says nothing about the photograph or the mysterious woman in it. Why would he leave out such a crucial detail? Could it be that Ben knows more than he's letting on? As Graves tries to make sense of it all, his mind races through the possible scenarios. Could Ben be the murderer, or is this confession a carefully crafted lie? And if it is, what's his game? What is he trying to hide? Ben sits there, eyes locked on Graves, his hands trembling ever so slightly. The confession feels almost too easy, like a piece of a puzzle that's been forced into place, but the edges don't quite match. Something is off, and Graves knows it. But the more he looks at Ben, the more questions pile up, and the deeper the mystery grows. Cliffhanger ending. Graves stands abruptly, knocking his chair back in frustration. "You're telling me the truth, aren't you, Whitaker?" His voice is sharp, but the doubt lingers. "You shot Colonel Protheroe because he humiliated you. That's it." Ben's lips curl into a tight, almost imperceptible smile. "Isn't that enough?" he says, his voice dripping with something Graves can't quite place defiance. Or perhaps something darker, more sinister. As Graves turns to leave, the door slams open behind him. The sound echoes through the station, a sudden interruption that sends a chill down his spine. It's one of the officers, pale and wide-eyed, holding a piece of paper in his trembling hands. He rushes forward, practically gasping for breath. "Inspector," the officer stammers, "we just got a tip. It's about the photograph. We've identified the woman in it." Graves's heart skips a beat. The photograph, the one thing Ben didn't mention, the one detail he left out. The officer hands him the paper, and for a moment, Graves's world goes still. The woman in the photograph is someone he knows, someone connected to the town, someone he never expected. Ben's confession suddenly seems even more suspicious. Could he have been telling the truth, or is this just another layer of the intricate web of lies that Graves is caught in? The answers seem tantalizingly close, but just out of reach. Graves looks up at Ben, his eyes narrowing. "You didn't mention her," he says, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Why is that?" Ben's face twitches ever so slightly, his eyes darkening. "Because," he says, his tone now colder than before, "I didn't need to." The room feels colder, the tension palpable. The mysteries of Vicarage Lane are beginning to unfold, but with every answer, new questions arise. And Graves knows one thing for certain: someone is lying. The scene fades out, leaving the audience with the burning question: who is the woman in the photograph? And what role does she play in this twisted murder mystery? Second suspect: Arthur, the vicar's assistant. The air in the interrogation room grows colder as Arthur, the vicar's assistant, enters, his tall, thin frame casting a long shadow across the room. There's an eerie calmness about him, an unsettling serenity that seems out of place for someone accused of murder. His eyes are steady, his posture immaculate, as he takes a seat without so much as a tremor. Inspector Graves can't help but feel a chill run down his spine. There's something about Arthur's composed demeanor that sends shivers through the room. But it's not just the calmness, it's the certainty in his voice, the way he speaks like a man who's already reconciled with his fate. "I did it," Arthur states simply, his words hanging in the air, unruffled. "I killed Colonel Protheroe." His gaze is unwavering, his voice eerily measured. Graves leans forward, his eyes narrowing. This confession comes too easily, too calmly. "Why?" he asks, though he feels he already knows the answer. In a small town like St. Mary Mead, everyone has skeletons in their closet, but few are bold enough to confess to murder so openly. Arthur's eyes flicker, but only briefly. "He was going to ruin me," he says, his voice still eerily calm. "The colonel was a man who made his own rules, and he was ready to expose something that could destroy me, something that would break my life and my future with the church." He pauses, the quiet reverberating in the room. "I had no choice." The weight of his words falls heavily, but the inspector's mind is already racing. What secret could Arthur be hiding? Why would the colonel of all people be interested in exposing this man? Arthur shifts in his seat, a barely perceptible motion, but his lips twitch into something of a smile slightly too tight to be natural. He speaks with an air of finality, as if confessing were the only logical conclusion to a deeply calculated plan. "I shot him to protect myself. It was the only way." His eyes hold a strange emptiness now, as though he's detached from the gravity of his own words. Graves stares at him, trying to grasp the truth in the cold indifference of Arthur's confession. But there's more to this, isn't there? Graves presses, his voice hardening. Why didn't you mention the photograph? Why didn't you mention the woman? Arthur's lips curl into the faintest of smirks, but he remains silent, as if contemplating how much more to reveal. The confession has slipped from his lips too easily, too calculated. Something about his composure feels off, like he's playing a game where the rules are still unknown. The inspector's suspicion grows. Could Arthur be the killer? The calmness, the rationality, it all fits. But something gnaws at Graves's intuition. It's too neat, too staged. There's a deeper undercurrent here, something Arthur isn't revealing. And the fact that he's confessed without hesitation makes Graves uneasy. He knows that a confession doesn't always mean the truth. Miss Marple's first clue. While the investigation unfolds in the police station, Miss Marple, who has been watching the chaos from the sidelines, decides to take matters into her own hands. The elderly woman, often underestimated because of her quiet nature, steps away from the commotion and heads to the vicarage. She doesn't speak much, she never does, but there's a sharpness to her movements, a deliberate attention to detail that speaks volumes. She knows something isn't right. As she enters the vicarage, she finds herself in the study, the very place where Colonel Protheroe's life was brutally taken. The room feels thick with the weight of the investigation, the air heavy with tension. She glances around, her eyes scanning the shelves, the furniture, the very corners of the room. Nothing escapes her attention. Her fingers trace the edge of an old fireplace, worn from years of use. She notices something odd about the grate, something out of place. With a swift motion, she pulls it open, revealing a hidden compartment. There, nestled inside, is a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper. Miss Marple's heart skips a beat. She reaches for it with the care of a woman who's seen far too much in her time, a woman who knows that no detail is too small. Unfolding the letter, she recognizes the handwriting. Immediate Colonel Protheroe's. Her eyes scan the paper quickly, the words seeping into her mind as she reads. The letter is short but chilling. It's a veiled, threat-veiled, yet unmistakable in its intent. It speaks of secrets, of betrayal, and of a future that would be torn apart if the contents of this letter were ever made public. But the letter doesn't name names. It only hints at something darker, something buried beneath the surface of St. Mary Mead's quiet streets. Miss Marple's brow furrows as she reads the letter again, this time more slowly. The words don't add up. The colonel wasn't just a man of power. He was a man with enemies. But the tone of the letter suggests something more personal. Someone in the town had angered him enough to warrant this threat. As she folds the letter carefully, her mind races. She knows she can't reveal this just yet, not until she has more information. The police are so focused on the suspects in front of them that they've missed this clue, the very clue that could unlock the entire mystery. Her face betrays nothing, but her eyes glisten with determination. She's onto something that the police have overlooked. The letter is her first clue, and she's certain it holds the key to unlocking the secrets that lie hidden beneath the surface of this seemingly quiet town. Cliffhanger ending. Just as Miss Marple tucks the letter away in her coat, a distant sound interrupts the stillness of the vicarage, a soft, steady knocking at the door. Her heart skips a beat as she rises to her feet. The knock is deliberate, echoing through the house like a faint whisper. She moves toward the door, her steps measured, her thoughts racing. Who could it be at this hour? What new twist is about to unfold? As she opens the door, she finds no one standing there, only a small, folded piece of paper resting on the doorstep. She picks it up, unfolding it slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. The note is simple but chilling. "You're getting too close, Miss Marple. Stop digging, or you'll be next." The threat hangs in the air like a dark cloud, heavy with implication. Miss Marple's eyes narrow. She's now a target. But she won't stop, not now. The audience is left in suspense. What will Miss Marple do next? Will she expose the secrets of St. Mary Mead, or will the darkness claim her before she can uncover the truth? The screen fades to black, leaving only the chilling sound of the wind whistling through the fog. The town of St. Mary Mead has never seemed more dangerous. Unraveling secrets. Diary discovery. The investigation has stalled. Inspector Graves and his team are at a standstill, their minds clouded by a flood of confessions, each more contradictory than the last. Frustration hangs thick in the air, but Miss Marple remains unfazed. As the police struggle to make sense of the chaos, she quietly slips into the Colonel's study once again, her mind sharp and focused. The room is silent, except for the soft creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet. She examines the cluttered desk with a practiced eye, the scent of old paper filling the air. She runs her fingers across the surface, brushing aside papers, until something catches her attention: a small, leather-bound diary. It's tucked behind a stack of old, yellowed books, hidden in plain sight. Miss Marple's eyes narrow as she opens the diary. The pages are filled with scribbled, frantic handwriting far different from the Colonel's usual meticulous notes. She flips through the pages, her heart racing as she reads the entries. Each one reveals a different side of the Colonel, filled with fear and paranoia. The tone of the writing is erratic, almost as if the Colonel's hand had been trembling as he wrote. One particular entry stands out. It's dated just a few days before his death. "I'm being watched. The snake is close. It's only a matter of time before he strikes. I've tried everything, but he's always one step ahead." The mention of the snake sends a chill down Miss Marple's spine. Who is this person? What hold do they have over the Colonel? She flips back a few pages and finds another entry, almost unreadable in its haste. "Blackmail, he controls everything. My life is in his hands." The diary paints a chilling picture. Colonel Protheroe was not just a tyrant, he was also a victim of someone far more sinister. The question now is, who is this snake, and how does this person tie into the murder? Suspect number 3, Lucy. Meanwhile, the investigation is about to take yet another turn. Lucy, the young housekeeper who had worked for the Colonel for several years, steps forward with a confession of her own. Her eyes are downcast as she speaks, her voice trembling. "I did it," she says softly, the words seemingly forced from her lips. He was a cruel man. He made my life unbearable. I couldn't take it anymore." She claims that the Colonel's abuse of power and his oppressive control over her life pushed her to the brink. The story is plausible, even sympathetic. Lucy speaks of years of verbal abuse, threats, and harassment. But as Miss Marple observes her closely, she notices something strange, a subtle shift in Lucy's body language. Her words are shaky, but her eyes don't quite match the emotion she's portraying. There's something rehearsed about the way she speaks, as though she's trying to convince herself as much as the others. Miss Marple leans back, her sharp eyes narrowing. Lucy's confession doesn't ring true. The young woman's posture is too rigid, her hands clasped too tightly in front of her. There's fear in her eyes, but it's not fear of the Colonel, it's fear of something else. Miss Marple's instincts scream that Lucy knows more than she's letting on. But what could she be hiding? As the investigation progresses, Miss Marple becomes more certain that Lucy is not the killer, but she could be a pawn in a far more dangerous game. Who is pressuring her to take the fall? And why? Danger looms. Miss Marple's sharp mind is piecing together the puzzle. But with every step closer to the truth, the stakes grow higher. She feels a strange tension in the air, as though someone or something's watching her. As she walks through the town, her senses heighten, her every step filled with suspicion. Is it just the pressure of the investigation, or is there someone who doesn't want her digging any deeper? The answer comes in the form of a near miss. One evening, as Miss Marple crosses the street, lost in thought about the new leads she's uncovered, a car races toward her. The headlights shine like a blinding spotlight as the vehicle barrels down the road, swerving violently toward her. She barely has time to react, her heart hammering in her chest as the car screeches to a halt just inches from her. Her breath catches in her throat as she steps back, her pulse racing. She could have been killed. She looks up at the driver, but the face is obscured by shadows. The figure behind the wheel, an unfamiliar silhouette. The car roars off into the night, leaving her standing in the middle of the street, shaken but alive. Miss Marple's instincts flare. This wasn't an accident. Someone is trying to silence her. The accident was no accident at all. She realizes, with a growing sense of dread, that her life is at risk. Whoever is behind the murder of Colonel Protheroe, the mysterious figure known as the Snake, will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Miss Marple is getting too close to the truth, and someone is willing to kill to keep it hidden. She can feel it in the pit of her stomach. She's uncovered something far bigger than a simple murder. There are forces at work here, shadows that reach far beyond the Colonel's death. Someone is pulling the strings, manipulating everyone in their path. But who? Cliffhanger ending. As Miss Marple gathers her bearings, her mind races. She knows she's on the brink of discovering something monumental, but the danger is closing in. The near-fatal encounter with the car was just a warning. She can no longer afford to be cautious. The walls are closing in, and the stakes have never been higher. In the midst of her thoughts, her phone rings. She picks it up, her heart pounding. The voice on the other end is familiar but distorted, as though deliberately masked. "You're getting too close, Miss Marple." The voice is cold, menacing. "If you continue digging, you won't live to see the truth." The line goes dead before Miss Marple can respond. Her breath catches. Who was that? And why does she feel like she's being toyed with? The realization hits her like a blow. Whoever the Snake is, they know she's on their trail. And they won't stop until she's silenced. Miss Marple stands in the middle of the quiet street, the weight of the danger pressing in on her. The fog is thick, the night closing in, but she's not backing down. She won't stop until she uncovers the truth, no matter the cost. The scene cuts to black, leaving the audience breathless, filled with questions. What is Miss Marple about to uncover? Who is the Snake? And how far will they go to protect their secrets? And more importantly, will Miss Marple survive the danger that's closing in around her? The suspense is unbearable, and the next move is anyone's guess. The midpoint. A turn for the worse. The investigation has reached a boiling point. Miss Marple, ever patient and calculating, has been confronting the suspects one by one, her sharp mind unraveling the tangled threads of their stories. Each confession she hears seems to raise more questions than answers, and the weight of their lies bears down on her. The more she digs, the more she realizes that this is no simple murder, it's a carefully crafted cover-up. As the walls close in on the suspects, Miss Marple begins to piece together a disturbing pattern. The Colonel's death isn't just about a personal vendetta or a crime of passion. It's about something far more sinister, a series of forged documents that, if revealed, would ruin the town's most prominent families. The stakes are higher than anyone could have imagined. The vicar's assistant, Arthur, is the first to crumble under Miss Marple's unrelenting questioning. His carefully crafted facade begins to crack as she pushes him for details. Arthur stammers, his usual calm demeanor faltering, revealing that he has been involved in something far darker than his role as a mere assistant. But he's not the only one. The other suspects, too, begin to tremble as Miss Marple subtly connects their histories to a web of deceit and betrayal. Each of them has something to hide, something that could topple the very foundation of the town. The final clue. As tension builds in the room, Miss Marple makes a chilling discovery. While everyone is preoccupied with their nerves and growing guilt, she continues her quiet search. Her sharp eyes fall on the Colonel's desk's drawers, filled with disorganized papers, offer no easy answers. But Miss Marple is not one to give up easily. Her fingers trace the edges of the desk, sliding open the bottom drawer, and her breath catches as she uncovers a hidden compartment. Inside, tucked beneath a pile of old receipts, is a list of names, each one scrawled on a separate piece of paper, each tied to a scandal so devastating it could ruin the town's wealthiest and most influential families. The names are all too familiar. Miss Marple's heart races as she realizes that the Colonel was blackmailing these people using the forged documents to control them. But it's the last name on the list that sends a chill down her spine. Arthur, the vicar's assistant, the man who had seemed so innocent, so kind. Miss Marple's mind races as she connects the dots. Arthur had been working closely with the Colonel for years, helping him maintain the delicate balance of power in the town. But now, Miss Marple realizes, Arthur has been hiding something even darker. He's not just the vicar's assistant. He's been an accomplice in the Colonel's schemes, and possibly even the mastermind behind the forgeries. But why? Before she can fully process this revelation, a sudden realization strikes her. The others are not just nervous, they're terrified. They've been hiding the truth for too long, and now Miss Marple is dangerously close to exposing it all. The game is on. Just as Miss Marple begins to confront Arthur, the danger escalates. Her instincts, always finely tuned, suddenly scream at her to move. Her breath catches in her throat as a shadow looms over her. She turns just in time to see a figure dart toward her, a gloved hand closing around her throat with terrifying speed. The pressure on her windpipe is suffocating. The world around her begins to blur as the mysterious figure tightens their grip, their cold eyes burning with a silent fury. Miss Marple struggles to break free, but the hands around her neck are unyielding. Panic starts to claw at her chest as her vision fades. She feels the darkness creeping in, the cold reality of death inching closer. But just as everything begins to slip away, a surge of adrenaline pushes Miss Marple to act. She kicks out, her foot connecting with the figure's knee, sending them stumbling backward. In that split second, she frees herself, gasping for air as she stumbles backward, her heart pounding in her ears. The figure vanishes into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. Miss Marple, breathless and shaken, clutches the edge of the desk for support. Her mind races. She's been targeted. Someone is desperate to stop her from uncovering the truth. But who? And why? She can feel the danger closing in on her from all sides. The list of names, the forged documents, Arthur's connection to the Colonel, it's all coming together. But the more she learns, the more dangerous it becomes. She's not just uncovering a murder, she's uncovering a conspiracy that could destroy everything. Cliffhanger ending. Miss Marple's hands tremble as she gathers the names from the desk, clutching them to her chest as if they are the last thread of safety in a world gone mad. She doesn't have much time. The danger is real, and someone is willing to kill to protect their secrets. But who? Suddenly the door creaks open behind her. She spins around, her breath catching in her throat. A figure stands in the doorway. Arthur, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and guilt. He knows she's onto him. But Miss Marple is not backing down. She's getting closer to the truth, and she's willing to risk everything to expose it. Arthur's eyes flicker toward the door, then back at her. He takes a step forward, his voice low and trembling. "You should have left this alone, Miss Marple. You have no idea what you're dealing with." The suspense is unbearable. Miss Marple doesn't flinch, but her mind races. She knows that Arthur holds the key to everything. But what will happen next? Will she be able to expose the truth, or will the shadows that have been chasing her for so long finally catch up with her? The scene ends, leaving the audience on the edge of their seats, desperate to know what will happen next. The stakes have never been higher. The final act. The gathering. The tension in the vicarage is palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Miss Marple has done the unthinkable. She has invited all the suspects to the library, a room heavy with the weight of their secrets and lies. The floor creaks under their steps as they file in one by one, each person trying to mask their nerves, but none succeeding. The dim, flickering light from the fireplace casts shadows over the faces of the suspects, making their features seem even more twisted, more uncertain. The air is thick with anticipation. They know Miss Marple is close to uncovering the truth. The silence is deafening as they take their seats, their eyes darting from one to another, unsure of who will crack first. As the door shuts with an echo, Miss Marple stands at the front of the room, her eyes scanning each face. The calm, serene expression on her face belies the storm of thoughts running through her mind. She's reached the final stage of her investigation, and the pieces are almost in place. But something feels different now. Danger lurks in every corner, and she knows that this confrontation will either bring the truth to light or push the mystery into the abyss of darkness forever. With a voice steady and unflinching, she begins. "I know the truth, but you all have a role to play in how this will end. I want you to tell me everything." Suspects break down. The first to crack is Lucy. She shifts in her chair, her hands trembling as she lowers her head, ashamed. For a moment she says nothing, her lips sealed tight as if the truth would tear her apart. But the weight of the situation is too much, and the dam finally breaks. With tears welling up in her eyes, Lucy confesses a dark secret that has haunted her family for years, a secret she has kept buried in the depths of her soul. She admits that her mother, once a beautiful woman of high social standing, had been in a secret affair with Colonel Protheroe. The affair had lasted for years, and it was the Colonel's cruelty that drove Lucy's mother to despair. That's why he was so ruthless. Lucy chokes out, her voice shaking. He used my mother, manipulated her, then cast her aside when she no longer suited his needs. And when he found out about my mother's affair with someone else, someone more powerful, he used it to blackmail her and others in town. Her voice falters, but the truth is out now. The revelation has a ripple effect on everyone in the room. The tension escalates as the others exchange wary glances. Miss Marple observes the room, noting the reactions of each person, her eyes sharp and calculating. She knows there's more to the story, but this is just another piece in the puzzle. A new confession. Just as Miss Marple begins to process this new information, the air in the room shifts again. Arthur, who has been eerily silent up until now, suddenly stands. His hands tremble as he steps forward, his usual calm demeanor shattered. The others turn to him, their faces a mixture of surprise and suspicion. Arthur's confession is not what anyone expects. I wasn't the one who killed him, he admits, his voice heavy with the weight of his guilt, but I was part of it all, part of the scheme. I was blackmailed, just like everyone else. The room falls into stunned silence as Arthur's words sink in. He continues, his voice shaking with the confession that has been haunting him for so long. I had no choice. They threatened to destroy everything I had, my reputation, my family, everything. Someone more powerful, someone who controlled the Colonel, was pulling the strings. I had to do their bidding, or I'd be ruined. The revelation sends a shiver through the room. Who could be behind all this manipulation? Who had the power to control both the Colonel and Arthur, forcing them into a web of deceit and corruption? Miss Marple's mind races, but she knows the final piece is close. One more confession, one more truth, and the murderer will be revealed. The truth unveiled. Miss Marple takes a deep breath, her heart racing as the final pieces of the puzzle click together. She turns her gaze back to Ben Whitaker, whose confession had seemed too perfect, too rehearsed. For a moment, it feels like everything has led to this point. And then, the truth hits her like a lightning bolt. The real murderer is Ben Whitaker. His confession, his supposed moment of guilt, was nothing more than a carefully crafted decoy, a masterful act to throw suspicion off the real motive. But Ben didn't kill Colonel Protheroe out of rage. No, this was a cold, calculated move to protect something far more valuable to him, his hidden wealth and connections. Miss Marple slowly approaches him, her eyes locked on his. The truth, once hidden behind a web of lies, is finally laid bare. You killed him, she says softly, her voice sharp with conviction, not because of anger, but because the Colonel had discovered your hidden wealth, the fortune you had been concealing from everyone. He had threatened to expose you, and in your fear of being ruined, you decided to silence him. Ben's face pales as Miss Marple continues. You orchestrated the whole thing from the confessions to the clues, all designed to mislead the investigation. You knew the Colonel was connected to too many powerful people, and his death would cover up your secrets. Ben's eyes dart around the room, panic flickering in his gaze. He tries to speak, to defend himself, but the truth has already been spoken. The web of lies he has spun has finally unraveled, and the room feels heavier, darker, as the weight of his actions settles upon them all. Cliffhanger ending. Just as Miss Marple prepares to close in on Ben, ready to end the charade once and for all, the door to the library slams open. A gust of cold wind sweeps through the room, and all eyes turn to the figure standing in the doorway. It's Arthur, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. No, he shouts, his voice breaking. You're wrong. You don't know everything. There's more to this. It's not over yet. The room goes still as Miss Marple's mind races. What more could there possibly be? She turns to Arthur, her heart pounding as the mystery deepens, yet again. "Tell me, Arthur," Miss Marple demands, her voice unwavering. "What haven't you told me?" The suspense is unbearable. The final twist is waiting, and the audience is left on the edge of their seats, desperate to know what comes next. The web of lies has unraveled, but in the end, it seems the truth is more elusive than ever. Climax. The final twist. The air in the Vicarage library is thick with anticipation, each person hanging on Miss Marple's every word. The clock ticks steadily, the silence almost unbearable. The truth seems to be within reach, the mystery almost solved. Everyone has confessed, the pieces of the puzzle have come together, and yet something is still off. Miss Marple stands, her calm gaze sweeping across the room. The tension in the air seems to ripple as she steps toward the door. She hasn't said much in the last few minutes. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, have done most of the talking. The suspects remain seated, their faces a mixture of relief and anxiety, each one waiting for the final declaration that will absolve or condemn them. But as Miss Marple reaches the door, she stops. The entire room holds its breath. She turns slightly, her voice cutting through the silence. "You've all played your parts so well, but the real murderer is still free." Her words hang in the air like a heavy fog, chilling and unnerving. Every eye in the room widens in disbelief. The ground beneath their feet seems to shift. What does she mean? How can that be? The confessions, the clues, the revelations, everything pointed to Ben. Everything was supposed to be over. Miss Marple takes a step back, her hand brushing against her coat pocket, and she pulls out a small folded piece of paper. She sets it down on the table with a deliberate motion, as if the very action holds weight. Her eyes never leave the group as she says quietly, "This is the name of the person you least expect." With a faint smile, she opens the door and exits without another word. The soft sound of her footsteps fades as she walks down the corridor, leaving the room in stunned silence. The others, frozen in place, exchange uncertain glances, trying to process the weight of what's just happened. A shocking conclusion. The camera pans slowly over the characters' faces. First, to Ben Whittaker, his face still a mask of shock, his earlier bravado now completely shattered. His lips tremble, and he looks down at the note on the table, unsure whether to open it or leave it untouched. His mind races. Who could it be? Who else could have had a hand in this? Lucy is next, her tear-streaked face still trying to make sense of the twists and turns of the evening. Her hands are clasped tightly together, and her eyes dart nervously between the others in the room, trying to make sense of Miss Marple's cryptic words. Her heart pounds in her chest as the thought begins to sink, and there's more to this than anyone could have imagined. Arthur's face is pale, his body tense. He can't even bring himself to look at the note. He knew something was off, but this was beyond his comprehension. He is still reeling from his confession, but now the mystery feels even deeper than before. Then the camera lingers on the table, where the note sits like a ticking time bomb. A single piece of paper, folded carefully but ominously. The audience holds their breath, waiting for the next move, unsure of who will dare to pick it up first. The room feels smaller, the walls closing in as the realization sets in. They've all been players in a game far more dangerous than they ever imagined. Finally, Ben, trembling, reaches out and slowly unfolds the paper. His fingers hesitate for a moment, as if he's scared to face what's written inside. The other suspects lean in, their eyes fixed on him, each person silently praying that the name they find will make sense. But when Ben reads it aloud, his voice shakes. Miss Clarissa Jameson. The name reverberates through the room, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Miss Clarissa Jameson once suspected her. She had been a quiet, almost invisible presence in the town. A woman who had never drawn attention to herself, someone who always seemed to be in the background of the town's affairs. She was a respected member of society, always polite, always composed. But now, everything shifts. The unassuming woman who had never once seemed capable of such a crime is now at the heart of this twisted puzzle. And yet, Why would Miss Marple leave such an explosive name as her parting gift? What could it mean? As the group stares at each other, the camera zooms out, slowly panning across the room, capturing the faces of the suspects frozen in disbelief. The sound of a distant bell tolls softly, a somber reminder that there is still so much to uncover, so much left to be done. A final line. The screen begins to fade to black, and just as the last hint of light disappears, a final line appears in white text, breaking the silence. Some secrets are never meant to be revealed. The bell tolls again, its sound echoing in the fading darkness. The screen cuts to black. And then nothing. The world is left hanging. The audience is left hanging. The mystery is still not fully solved. Clarissa Jameson, was she the real murderer? Or was Miss Marple's final clue just another piece in the endless web of lies and deceit? The truth is still out there, and the questions remain unanswered, leaving everyone with one haunting thought: what happens next?